In today's video, we're going to dive into the top 3 chess traps that can catch your opponent off guard. These traps are perfect for improving your tactical vision and securing quick victories. This game begins with pawn to e4, pawn to e5, and pawn to d4 entering the game. The opening moves are very standard, with black playing knight to c6. White responds with queen to a3, the main move in this variation. Here, black plays bishop to b4. It's worth noting that black often delays playing knight to f6 in this variation. Black avoids developing the knight to f6 out of concern that white might push the pawn to f5, forcing the knight to move. To counter this, black seeks alternative setups, such as bishop to b4. White pushes the bishop back, and it retreats to a5. White then develops with bishop to c4, while black places the knight on e7 instead of f6. The reason remains the same. Black fears white's potential pawn pushed to a5, so they choose the safer square a7. White follows up with queen to g3, creating a straightforward threat to capture the g7 pawn. At this point, it seems black can defend easily with a natural move like castling. However, this allows white to continue or even initiate an attack. White plays pawn to h4, preparing for an assault. Alternatively, white could have started the attack immediately with bishop to h6, exploiting the pin along the g-file. At first glance, bishop to h6 might seem like a powerful move, but black can easily defend by playing knight to g6, effectively neutralizing white's attack. This is why white chose to push the h-pawn instead, preparing to drive the knight away in the future. Now let's return to the main game. White played pawn to h4, positioning it as a potential asset for a future attack. Black responded with knight to g6, sensing potential danger around the king and aiming to reinforce the defense. White continued with pawn to h5, targeting the knight. Black then played knight to a5, attacking white's bishop on c4. At this point, black likely expected the bishop to retreat, but white found a much stronger move, bishop to g5, directly attacking black's queen on d8. As you can see, the black queen has only one square to move to, so black plays queen to e8. At this point, white has a winning continuation, but it requires calculating a few moves ahead. Take a moment to think. Can you find the decisive move for white in this position? The winning move is bishop to f6, which immediately secures the game. The threat is simple. White plans to capture the pawn on g7. The g7 pawn cannot capture the bishop because it is pinned with black's king directly behind it. The only way for black to attempt to defend the g7 square is to play pawn to g6, but white's attack remains overwhelming. White now threatens to capture the pawn on g6, leaving black with limited options. If black captures with the h-pawn, white can checkmate in one move with rook to h8. This is a classic tactical pattern where the bishop controls crucial squares and the rook delivers the checkmate. It's a common setup in tactical exercises and games. To avoid this, black captures with the knight instead. Initially, it seems like white has no immediate follow-up, while black plans to capture the pawn on e4, potentially disrupting white's position. However, white has a stronger idea, capturing the knight on g6, forcing black to recapture with the pawn. This allows white to checkmate with rook to h8. The tactical pattern with the bishop on f6 is key, as it controls important squares around black's king and opens up multiple checkmate opportunities. Let's move on to trap number 2. The game begins with white playing pawn to e4, followed by black responding with pawn to e5. Then, white plays d4, introducing traps you can easily apply in practical games. David Bernstein, a legendary player from the past, is playing as white. Interestingly, this game resembles the Scandinavian defense, but with reversed colors. Let's dive in. Black captures on d4, and white's queen recaptures. Black develops their knight to c6, attacking the queen, prompting the queen to move to a4. Black plays knight to f6, and white follows with knight to c3. So far, all moves are logical. Black then plays pawn to d5, which also seems solid. Here comes Bernstein's first brilliant move. While many players in similar situations would instinctively capture the pawn, Bernstein follows the principle of increasing pressure instead of rushing to take. He plays bishop to g5, targeting the knight on f6, which controls critical squares e4 and d5. Bernstein keeps intensifying pressure on black's center. Black eventually captures the pawn. White recaptures, and black responds with queen to e7. It appears that white is in a bit of trouble due to the pin on the knight along the e-file, as the knight cannot move with the white king positioned behind it. At first glance, it might seem white's only options are to protect the knight or capture the black knight on f6 with the bishop. However, Bernstein made a bold and unexpected move. Ignoring black's threat, he calmly played queenside castling. Perhaps his opponent assumed that Bernstein had overlooked the fact that black could simply capture the knight, which black did by playing queen takes a4. At this point, there is a brilliant tactical opportunity. Try to find it before I reveal the move. You have 5 seconds to evaluate this position. It's white's turn. How would you play as white? Can you find the winning move? The move is rook to d8, an unexpected and shocking move that immediately leads to victory. After this move, black resigned on the spot. Here's why. The rook move forces black's king to capture on d8, as the knight cannot take the rook due to being pinned by white's queen. Once the king captures the rook, it becomes pinned along the d-file. This allows white to capture black's queen for free, as the knight cannot recapture due to being pinned by white's bishop. With the loss of the queen and no recovery, black has no choice but to concede. A truly beautiful combination by white. And as you can see, all the moves from both sides were quite natural, making it a brilliant example. Now, let's move on to trap number 3. The game begins with pawn to e4, pawn to e5, followed by pawn to d4. Black captures on d4, and white's queen recaptures. Black develops with knight to c6, and white moves the queen to e3. Interestingly, this is a real game where white set a smart trap but failed to discover the winning sequence at the critical moment. Let's examine the position and determine the best moves. Black played bishop to e7, and white responded with knight to c3. After black developed the knight to f6, white played bishop to d2, aiming to prepare queenside castling. This is a common strategy in this opening, as white's queen is already developed, making it easier to coordinate the queenside pieces for castling. Black played pawn to d5, a natural move to contest the center and prepare for queenside development. White recaptured the pawn, and although black could have taken it with the knight, he instead played knight to bb4, targeting the pawn on c2. This move threatens to fork white's valuable pieces and prepares to capture on d5 with the other knight. White castled, and black responded with knight takes d5 from f6. Black recognized that if white recaptured on d5, he could play an intermediate move, winning a pawn and weakening white's castled position. Black captured the pawn on a2 with a check, forcing white to move the king, and then safely recaptured the knight. Black was likely pleased at this point after the intermediate move knight takes a 2, winning a pawn and slightly compromising white's position. In the game, white attempted to counterattack with rook to e1, hoping to create pressure along the e-file. However, black simply responded with bishop to e6, blocking the file, and white's attack fizzled out. Black went on to win the game. However, white had a winning continuation here by playing pawn to b3, threatening to capture the knight. This would have forced black to regret moving the knight so far from support. The only way to save the knight would be retreating it to b4. Here's a common tactical pattern to remember. In black's position, certain pieces, specifically the queen and knight, are somewhat isolated and poorly protected. These are called hanging pieces, meaning they are vulnerable and can be targeted. When you notice hanging pieces in your opponent's position, always look for ways to exploit this weakness. In this case, white has a winning continuation. Can you find it? White can't simply take the knight on b4, as black would recapture the rook on d1, resulting in a loss of the exchange. However, there's a better move. If you've been paying attention, you might have noticed the winning idea. Look for a check. White should have captured the bishop on e7, and after king takes, white could follow up with bishop to b4, delivering a check while also attacking black's queen. The only way for black to protect the queen would be to move the king forward, but this doesn't help, as white can then play bishop to c4 using the pin. This forces black to capture, and by the end of the line, white will be up a knight, securing the win. Thanks for watching.